Hi everybody, this is Miss Riley, and you're about to watch a video on how to conjugate reflexive verbs. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's first look at what the definition of a reflexive verb is. And keep in mind that there are a couple of different types of reflexive verbs. For Chapter 2A, we're mainly going to be focusing on one type. And so that type of reflexive verb that we're focusing on are verbs whose actions reflect back onto the subject. Well, what does that mean? That means that in this case, the subject is going to be doing something to him or to herself. So notice that this picture, in this picture, this girl is brushing her own hair. She's not brushing someone else's hair. So the verb that I would be using to describe this picture would be a reflexive verb. The same thing in this example right here. This girl is brushing her own teeth. So that action is being reflected back onto her. She's doing something to her own self. Notice the differences here in these two pictures. In my first one, I have vestirse, and remember that reflexive verbs, I can tell that they're reflexive because in the infinitive form, and an infinitive is a verb that still has the AR or the ER or the IR attached to it, it's going to have se attached to the infinitive. That's how I can recognize reflexive verbs. But in this picture, the boy is dressing himself. So vestirse here means to dress oneself. He's doing that action to himself. But over here in this picture, el papá viste a su hijo, the father is dressing the son. So he's not dressing himself, but he's doing that action to someone else. So we can see that in the second example here of the father, there is no reflexive pronoun. Let's look at our reflexive pronouns. I have 6 of them: me, te, se, nos, os, and se. And remember that since these two pronouns are exactly the same, the way that I can tell the difference would be in the subjects themselves, if the subject is either singular or plural, or the verb conjugation would tell me what the se translates into. How do we conjugate verbs? I go through steps. I think that those are pretty simple. So my step 1 is to always take off the se, because that way when you take off the se, you are left with a verb that you can recognize. Step 2 is you need to determine the subject of the sentence, and then you need to conjugate the verb accordingly. Or you might need to leave it in the infinitive if that's necessary. So conjugate or leave as an infinitive. Step 3 is you need to find the appropriate reflexive pronoun that matches the subject, and then you need to place the pronoun either in front of a conjugated verb or attached to an infinitive. So let's give this example. If I'm trying to conjugate yo and my verb is cepillarse, step 1, I take off the se. And so now I'm left with cepillar. And that is a lot more comfortable for students when you're just beginning reflexive verbs. We know what to do with cepillar. So now I'm going to conjugate. My subject is yo, so my conjugation is cepillo. Step 3 is I need to find the matching reflexive pronoun. If my subject is yo, then my appropriate reflexive pronoun is going to be me. And then I'm going to place that pronoun in its appropriate place. Because in this example I did conjugate cepillar, then I'm placing the me in front of the verb. And so literally this is going to translate into I brush myself. And then you can add whatever part of yourself you are brushing, such as your hair. Let's do this example. Luisa vestirse. Step 1. We take off the se. So I'm left with vestir. Step 2, I conjugate. Remember though that vestirse is a stem changing verb. It changes from E to I, so here's that I. Step 3 is I find the appropriate reflexive pronoun. That would be se, since Luisa is my subject. And then again, because I conjugated, I place the se in front of my verb. So Luisa se viste rápidamente. And that translates into Luisa dresses herself, and that's the se, quickly. Last one, tú necesitas, and then ducharse is my verb. Step 1, I take off the se, so I'm just left with duchar. Step 2, I conjugate if it's necessary. Remember that in this particular sentence, because I already have a conjugated verb here, I am not going to be conjugating duchar. So I actually do not conjugate. That's why I have here if necessary. Step 3, I need to find the appropriate pronoun. Even though I'm leaving this as an infinitive, I still have to go to this step 3. I still need to choose an appropriate pronoun to use. And because my subject is tú, then I need to change the se to a te. Okay, and so here's what I was talking about earlier. I do not conjugate duchar. But in this sentence, I have two choices of where I can put te, because remember that your options are in front of the conjugated verb, and my conjugated verb in this sentence is necesitas. And so here's my example sentence for that. Here's the te in front of the conjugated verb. Tú te necesitas duchar. So infinitive, conjugated. Or my second option is I can attach it to the infinitive, which would be duchar. And so here is my example sentence of that. Tú necesitas ducharte. But notice that in both sentences, I'm only using one te. Okay, and it's only in one place.